Hey everyone, this is Skater Zero. This is going to be another video on some of the inner workings of the gadgets I showed in the introductory video, which if you haven't seen, you should go check out. I'm going to be basically just covering how these rising edge detector, falling edge detector, and just general edge detector work. So I'll start with the rising edge detector. If you haven't seen the video, I'll just show really quickly again. This is the input. The door over there is just a visual version of the output. It's actually that torch, but so you can actually see it. The rising edge is when the input goes from low to high. You get a pulse at the output. So I switched the input from low to high, and the door opened and closed, which is the pulse. And nothing happens when it goes from high to low. So it only get a pulse when you go from low to high. So that's the rising edge detector. And then the falling edge detector is pretty similar. This is the input. The door is the visual version of the output. It's really that torch is the output. When you switch from this input going from high to low, you get a pulse. So when I switch it on, nothing happens. When I switch it off, you get the pulse. So the way this works is, this is the input. It has to go in two directions, so you take the input and make two different signals. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call this signal A, which is just the original signal, and I'm going to call this signal B. So signal B and signal A are both coming from the same signal, but I want to call this the delayed signal, because that's really what it is. It's just A, but delayed, and I'll call this just signal. So that's the signal, the input, that's the delayed version of it. So the way that this works is, when the input goes from low to high, the signal or the input goes high, meaning this comes low. So when this is high, the torch turns off. This would no longer be powered, because when this was low, this is still going to be low because it's delayed. It's a little bit slow. It'll be behind. So when I switch this to high, you'll notice that for a brief second, the delayed version was the same as the old version. So the old version was it being low. So for that brief moment where the signal input is high and the old signal, or the delayed version, was low, this turns off, which allows that to turn on, which gives you power to the door, which opens it. But once this comes high and it passes through this delay, eventually this gets updated, and when I flip the switch, you'll see it pass through here, and this is now powered again, which turns that back off. So that's how the rising edge detector works. It basically, all of these detectors work on the same principle, that you take the input signal, break it into two different signals, delaying one and not delaying the other. So the falling edge, you can guess, it looks pretty similar to the rising edge one. The input is this block here. When the input goes from, I'll switch it to high. So the default state, this is high, which powers that, which makes sure that this is off. And then when it switches low, this will turn off, but this will still be high because there's a little bit of delay, so that will still be off, allowing this block to be off, allowing that to turn on, powering the door. But after a while, this new low, the signal that now became low, will pass through here, allowing this torch to turn on, powering this block, and allowing that to go back off. So now I've switched it back to low, so it went from high to low. This is now being powered by that, because this signal eventually did make its way through to here, repowering it and ending the pulse. So the duration of the pulse is just dependent on how many repeaters you have. If I add another repeater here, the door should stay open for a little bit longer. So that was a little bit longer, and then if I shorten these up, it should open for only a very short amount of time on the falling edge, which is this one. So that was a lot shorter. So you can play with the length of the pulse. The only thing you have to be careful of is, if you do that, you actually get sort of a weird, you know, if the pulse is too quick, it doesn't really have, like, you have to have the pulses overlap. But it's not too much of a deal as long as you know, aren't dealing with like weird, you know, if you're just doing like buttons and normal stuff, as long as you're not dealing with like weird one tick stuff, which Redstone isn't all that great at short pulses, and stuff burns out and stuff just gets weird. So for the most part, if you're having problems, chances are your delay may be too long. But that's the main idea, is just take the input, pass it through, and depending on whether or not the delayed input is negated using this torch, or the original signal is negated using the torch, the falling edge, the delayed signal is negated using the torch. So depending on which one you do, you get either rising or falling edge detectors. Now the just plain edge detector works the same way. I'll get rid of that. So this is the input. This version is the non-delayed. I mean, it's got a little bit of delay, but for the most part it's pretty much immediate from there to here. So this little section here is what they call a XOR gate, meaning if the input A and input B are different, you get an output. So you have your main input to the whole circuit making two separate inputs to an XOR gate. So when the state changes here, it immediately comes here. So the new state, the updated one, is now different than the old one. So you get an output because the XOR says they are different. So make an output of high output. And then eventually the new state makes its way into here, and the new state is already here because it went through pretty quickly. And once it finally gets to here, it says the XOR gate says they are now the same, so they have to be off. So the output here is off. So now when I flip this, you'll notice for that brief moment where this one had already updated to be high, but this one was low, that the door was open. But eventually it works, the updated state works its way through here. They're both now high, and the XOR gate says they're both the same, so they can't, the output has to be low. And then likewise when I switch back, you get a pulse. So that's how the pulse detector just for either edge works. I suppose you could also do the rising edge detector and the falling edge detector, put them like side by side, and or the outputs, meaning take this redstone torch and that redstone torch and connect them up, and the output of that, if it's a rising edge, that torch will turn on and send power to the output. If it's a falling edge, that torch will turn on and still send power to the output. So do whichever one you like. You don't have to use this version of the XOR gate. I just found this online, seemed to be the most simple, compact version, and it also used the new comparator blocks, which I kind of liked just to toy around with. So if you know of an XOR gate or you have one memorized, then you can use that, but I didn't, so I just got one online. But yeah, so that's how the falling, rising edge detectors work. The thing with these is if you say don't like the distance or the length, not the distance, but the length of this pulse, how long the door stays open. Let's say on the falling edge you wanted that door to stay open for a lot longer period of time. You can use what I called a pulse normalizer, which takes a pulse like a short pulse or even just any length pulse and makes it the length that you want it. So this is just a little demo. So the normal length of a stone button is about that long, which is long enough if you can sneak through the door. You might be able to make it, but sometimes you don't. And if you wanted to lengthen the normal duration of that pulse, or even the duration of one of those edge detectors, you could use this pulse normalizer. So when you click that button, even though it's off, the door has stayed open for a little bit longer. So it's just normalizing a short pulse to the length that you want it. And the way that works is you split up the input. One of the inputs goes into an RS NOR latch. So it goes in, it sets the RS NOR latch, meaning turns it to the on state, I guess. So if I get the button here, that's the set state. And then the other output, or the other direction for this button has to go, is through a delay. These are just a bunch of repeaters, and you have as many of them as you want however long you want the door to be open. So what that does is the button press first goes into this. It sets the RS NOR latch, turning this output on, opening the door, and then the delayed version of the button press takes a little bit longer, works its way through this chain, and then hits the reset side, which resets the RS NOR latch, closing the door. So that's how that works. You can kind of see it sets, that works its way around, and then resets it, the door closes, and it just gives you a pulse that is always the same length, even if the pulse, so actually I can demonstrate here. If I take a lever, if I give the same input a very short pulse, you still get the same length of time that the door is open. Or if I give it, say, a really long pulse that's even longer than the door was open, the door still stays open however long you wanted it to be open. So that's a pulse normalizer. There's another way of doing it here, which I tried first. It's maybe a little bit more secure than this one. I feel like this one you could run into some issues depending on the pulse lengths and all of that, but for the most part I haven't had any issues with it. But yeah, if you want, I will just, these are all repeaters, so if you want to copy this, that's a torch there, that's the RS NOR latch, this is the delay line, and then this circuit here is actually just a copy of the rising edge detector. So the input is here, and it opens the door for a set amount of time, even if the pulse is a very long pulse, or if the pulse is a very short pulse. It opens the door for the same amount of time. So that's what a pulse normalizer does, and that's how the rising and falling edge detectors work. You can couple them together to get maybe different things if you want your pulses to not be that short. Because if you wanted to make that pulse longer, you'd have to add a bunch of these in a row, and that just gets kind of nasty. And depending on how quickly you do this, you may actually mess up your circuit. So best thing to do is try to keep these as short as possible. Maybe even like that. You could probably even get away with just setting this to no delay or very little delay, and that to a single tick. So that does a very, very quick pulse. The door opens and closes very quickly. And then you could feed that into a pulse normalizer to get, you could even, if you wanted to, if you needed like a really long delay, you could actually have a minecart, traveling along some track, and then when it finally reaches the other end, it sets off a detector rail to reset this. Or you could have like a dispenser shoot out a block onto a pressure plate, and after I think like 5 minutes or whatever, that if it was just like a dirt block or something you didn't care about, it despawns, and then that pressure plate would turn off, which then you could negate to reset your latch. So you could get things, maybe at nighttime. You could, I actually might make a video of this later. At nighttime, you could have it open up your doors for say 5 minutes or something, or when it gets close to nighttime, open up your doors, and then you come back to your house, you could run right in, and then once it's completely dark, your doors would all close automatically. So I might try to figure something out if I can. I don't know if I can get something to work like that, but I'll make another video if I do, and keep an eye out for that. But that's about it for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. I'd like other people to see as well, so that they can use these schematics and come up with some cool things. If you haven't checked out the sort of introductory video, I covered what all these things do and just basics. Go check that out now, and I'll see you later.